Section 1. Nature of addictions. Well, addiction is basically an unhealthy dependence on something. This can be anything to food, porn, social media, even a person. And what makes all of this worse is that we know this thing is bad for us, yet we still do it. You still scroll, you still eat the junk, you still watch and jack off to the degenerate porn videos. And that's because of a neurotransmitter called dopamine. And basically what a neurotransmitter is it just basically signals things into the brain to cause it to do something. In this case, when dopamine is kind of released in your brain, you get a sense of pleasure in that thing. That's when you eat that piece of cake, you get a sense of pleasure. Or when you finally bust a nut, you get a sense of pleasure. Or when you scroll on social media for 3 hours, you get a sense of pleasure. That's basically dopamine being released into your brain. But this process isn't what makes addictions addictions. If we want to understand what encapsulates an addiction, we must understand the pleasure-pain balance. First, before I get into the pleasure-pain balance, I'm going to say terms such as instant gratification. Instant gratification are things that give you immediate pleasure. Think of any bad habits like drugs, porn, junk, social media when I say like this term. And I'm going to also say delayed gratification. And think of immediate pain when I say this. These are like the good habits. They could be things like deep work, exercise, and reading, meditation. Anyways, so let's get back to the pleasure-pain balance. So the pleasure-pain balance is an invisible scale in our brains where there's two sides. There's pleasure and there's pain. And their goal basically is to stay in a state of homeostasis, which is just like a fancy way of saying that they want to be equal, right? So you want to have an equal amount of pleasure and an equal amount of pain. That's what your brain wants, ideally. And you naturally have like an already like established baseline of dopamine, right? Because dopamine is responsible for things like movement and goal seeking. And it's just always being secreted in your brain just naturally. So you always have like this baseline of dopamine that will always be secreted no matter what happens. And like think of like a sine graph where every time you do an action that gives you pleasure, you go up to the side of pleasure. And it gets tipped more in your favor to the side of pleasure. And that's the feeling of pleasure when you get when you eat the cookie or scroll on social media. Now, this is fine. This process is fine. It's what comes after that's wrong. But what happens after is you go back to where you were and you actually go a little towards the pain side. And that's basically your baseline. Your baseline dips lower to where it was previously before. And that's where that feeling of shame after you just binge ate or post-nut clarity or disappointment after you wasted 3 hours of your time on Instagram. This is because your baseline, like when you started prior to consuming, is now lower to where it was after you consumed it. Obviously, your brain will go back to baseline because your brain loves like homeostasis. It wants to be at a baseline. So it's not necessarily the actions that are bad. It's the repeated action of doing it that causes the addiction. It's the repeated binge eating. It's the repeated social media scrolling. It's the repeated jacking off that causes the addiction. Because understand this. When you go and you do the action again, you're going to build a tolerance to the pleasure. Like you've ever watched a movie or read a book or like played a game and the second time around it wasn't as pleasurable. I mean, it was like still pleasurable, but not as pleasurable as the first time around. That's because you built up a tolerance to this certain stimulus. This means since you built up a tolerance, you're going to have to do more of that thing in order to get the same kind of high that you got the first time. And this process cycles throughout during an addiction. So the process goes like this. First, you're at baseline. Then you do an instant gratification activity, as we call it, porn, social media, whatever it is. You get a little bit of pleasure, you get a little high, and your scale, your pleasure-pain balance tips to that pleasure side. But after it tips to the pleasure side, your baseline drops towards the side of pain, and you feel a certain pain. But then your baseline goes back to normal, and you feel normal again. Then when you feel normal, you have the urge or desire to chase that high again. So you've like built a tolerance to that high already. You built a tolerance to that stimulus. So now what you have to do is you have to do a little more of that action to achieve the same high or a bigger one. Meaning after you finish the activity, your baseline drops even more to the side of pain. And you feel even more bad for doing it. You feel even more shame for doing it. And this process repeats and repeats. And this repeated process of that is called an addiction. That is the process that drives you to do those activities even though you know you shouldn't be doing them. Section 2, the other side. So the other side of this pain, and remember what I said about the pleasure-pain balance and how it always wants to stay balanced. It wants to always be in that state of homeostasis. And how if you feel pleasure, you get pain. And the opposite is true. If you feel pain, you get pleasure. Think of a time where you did like some hard shit, such as like finishing an essay for school or going to the gym and getting a good workout in, or you read a book. Just think back to anything that was like really hard and you didn't really want to do it. How did you feel after? After you finished it, you felt amazing. You felt like good, because just like that process that occurs during like the instant gratification activities, there's a separate process that occurs with delayed gratification activities. And all this process is the instant gratification like kind of process, but flipped. So the process for instant gratification is you're at baseline, you tip towards the side of pleasure, and your baseline drops. You go back to normal, you want to chase that same high, so you have to do more of that. And due to you doing more of that thing, a bigger dip in the pain side happens, and the process repeats. The pain side of this is you're at baseline. You do delayed gratification activities, tipping you towards the side of pain. During the action, you're feeling some sort of pain. And after you finish the action, you return back to baseline, which increases your pleasure. And you get that feeling of satisfaction or pleasure. And then you build up a pain tolerance, meaning you have to do more delayed gratification activities, which means you dip even more to the side of pain, meaning you get even more pleasure. This is the process that we want to go through day to day. We don't want to go and be on the instant gratification side of this, because every time we feel pain, we feel pleasure. Pain equals pleasure, and pleasure equals pain. True pleasure is found in pain. So how can we actually use the other side? We need to do two things. We need to understand something called the habit loop, and we need to do a dopamine detox. Section 3, habit loop. So the habit loop is a 4-step. It's kind of 4-step, but it's essentially a process that causes habits to form. And all a habit is a repeated practice. And at this moment, since you're watching this video, you have the habit of experiencing that instant gratification process because you're repeatedly practicing it. And I guess you can say like the habits and addictions are one and the same, but I like to think that the addiction is the thing that drives the habit. So if we can understand habits, we can tackle addictions as well. This is because habits and addictions are so like closely related to each other and they work together in a way. So the habit loop has 4 steps: craving, cue, routine, reward. And all of that is in that order. Craving is the driver of the loop, because what a craving does is it makes you actively seek out that thing. A craving is basically the anticipation of the reward. And this anticipation of the reward gives you a boost in dopamine, which makes you excited for that thing and makes you actively seek it out. So for example, has your parents ever said we're going to Disney World and you got excited? That excitement was caused by a boost in dopamine due to an anticipation of the said reward, which is Disneyland. Or did they say that we're going to get ice cream after school and you got excited? That was the anticipation of the reward, which was ice cream. And that is called the craving. So when you're craving junk food, you anticipate the dopamine boost before it happens. Or when you're horny, you think about jacking off. You're anticipating the dopamine or pleasure that you get from the nut or social media. You anticipate the pleasure you get. So craving is the anticipation of the reward. Now cue works together with the craving. Cue is basically a trigger, a thing that triggers you to crave. So take junk food. If you see a box of donuts on the table, you'll crave the sugar high. It will give you, which will propel you to like do the thing, which is binge eat and eat the donuts. Or for example, if you're scrolling on Instagram and you see an Instagram baddie shaking ass, that could be your cue for you to crave the release you get when you jack off. So essentially your cue and craving work together. You'll see something that triggers your craving or the anticipation of the reward. And that anticipation of the reward boosts your dopamine, and this boost makes you actively seek out said reward, which goes on to our next thing, which is routine. Once you're anticipating the reward, you do the action. So whatever your routine is basically just that action. So your routine would be scrolling on social media or jacking off or binge eating. That would be your routine. Your routine is just the action of it, or like the habit, or whatever you want to call it. Now, reward goes deeper than just the sugar high. I believe in a habit, there's 2 types of rewards. There's shallow rewards and there's deep rewards. Shallow rewards are the rewards at the surface. So ask yourself, what is the immediate benefits you get from doing this thing? Don't think too hard about it. Like, why do you eat the donuts? Is it for a sugar high? Why do you scroll on social media? Is it to help with boredom and entertain you? What is like the surface area reasons for you like to do this habit? Now, in order to find your deep reward, and your deep reward is the root of the problem. This reward is the reason why you do that habit. It drives everything. The craving, cue, routine, it drives everything. This deep reward drives everything. This deep underlying reward that you're too scared to say drives it all. And in order to find it, you have to ask yourself, what does this shallow reward give me? What does this mean? This means basically if your shallow reward was a sugar high or release, ask yourself, what does the sugar high or release or whatever your shallow reward is, what does that give me? Just sit on that question for a while and you might realize that this sugar high actually gives you an escape from depression or might give you an escape on your anxiety. There's two things this reward can give you. It's either you're running away from something, usually feeling like loneliness, anxiety, or depression, or you're fulfilling something. Maybe like a deep desire that you have, such as status, or maybe this thing makes you feel wanted. It helps with your self-image. Whatever it is, find that deep reward because we're going to be needing it. So just a quick recap. When you're craving something, that's an anticipation of a reward. You crave something when you see a trigger, and this craving boosts dopamine, which makes you actively seek out the activity. You do the activity to get a shallow reward, and this shallow reward helps fulfill a deeper underlying reward. So you going through this repeated process of doing the bad habit, feeling bad, then doing it like more of the bad habit to feel even worse is driven through a deep underlying reward. And if we're simply able to get rid of this deep underlying reward or the problem that it shows for us, then you will simply just stop doing the bad habits that are taking control of our lives. You probably have been struggling with this for years, but simply if you just destroy that deep underlying reward, then you just won't do the habit anymore. Section 4, dopamine detox. What a dopamine detox basically is, you probably already know, but a dopamine detox is a 30-day protocol where you essentially abstain from this bad habit. So you should have your deep reward, the real reason why you do this thing. Is it depression, anxiety, to escape trauma, to escape stress, or is it to gain respect, status, or fulfillment? Whatever it is, it's important to note that you shouldn't go and do the dopamine detox if you haven't identified that deep reward. Remember, find your shallow reward through asking what does the action itself. So what does, binge eating or going on porn or scrolling on social media give you? What is that reward? And then when you want to find your deep reward, you ask, what does this shallow reward give me? And the goal of this dopamine detox is to, one, find a new purpose. And this is so after the dopamine detox, you're able to have goals to pursue so you don't go back to that vice, to that thing that's been controlling you. Or at the very least, find something that you want to pursue or are interested in. And the second thing we want to do is get rid of this underlying reward that's driving us to do all these things in the first place. So let's start with purpose first. Your purpose is essentially what you are meant to do, something that just feels right for you. And your purpose is small. It can be to teach people, inspire people, or to provide protection to your family, whatever it is. Purpose is something that just feels right for you to do. It's always small. Nobody was put on this earth to be a messiah and change the world, but people have. And that's because the vessel at which they exercise their purpose is big. Like Martin Luther King. His purpose was to inspire people. That's why he was good at talking, and he had a lot of conviction in his voice. At first glance, that's a noble purpose, but it's not necessarily a big purpose. But the way he exercised his purpose was through an entire movement, which was big. So your purpose is small, but the way you can exercise the purpose can be big. And you find your purpose through stagnation. Much like when a caterpillar is in a cocoon to metamorphosize into a butterfly, you have to simply just sit down for a while, turn off all distractions of the world, and drown out everything to ask yourself, what is it that you want? Not anybody else. What is it that you want? You can journal it, ask it to yourself, whatever. But ask yourself, what is it that you want? Not anyone else. So during this dopamine detox, take time to just stand still and ask yourself that question. And I promise you, something will come to you. And when it does, work on it. Plain and simple. Also, purpose has layers. And these layers basically get you to your core purpose. But if you want me to be completely honest, you'll never reach your core purpose, because if you did, then you should just kill yourself, because there's nothing left for you on earth to pursue. So your entire life is just peeling back purpose layer after purpose layer after purpose layer. And the only way to start this process and actually start living life is through finding your purpose layer now. So during that dopamine detox, whenever you have free time, instead of distracting yourself, sit with yourself and ask, what is it that you truly want in life? And a thought will pop up, and that thought will just feel right for you. And once you feel like that feeling of it just feeling right, that is your purpose, or at least something that you think is worth pursuing. So then do it. Now to tackle this underlying deep reward or reason for you doing like this whole thing, right? Let's be honest. You're not going to go cold turkey on this thing just because you said you will. You need something to replace it. There's a beautiful quote that says, an unoccupied mind is the devil's workshop. If you have nothing to do, those bad habits, those vices are going to seem more attractive. So during this dopamine detox, your mind will be unoccupied a lot. So you need to find a way to productively occupy it. And this is where this comes in. Place the bad habit that you're trying to break with a good habit that fulfills your deep reward. So what exactly does this mean? This means, let's say your bad habit or addiction you want to break is social media. And you found out that your shallow reward is that it gives you a sense of entertainment and it helps distract you. And the entertainment and distractions help you run away from your loneliness. Find a good habit that helps with the problem and helps you run away from your loneliness. You can join a boxing gym or a jiu-jitsu gym where you can make friends with people, maybe practice social skills. Whatever it is, find a good habit that helps fulfill that deep reward. And then during this dopamine detox, that's what you're going to focus on, or like the bulk of your time is on that good habit that helps you get rid of that underlying reason. I think the biggest example of this, or at least the biggest one that comes to mind, is Alex Pereira. If you don't know Alex Pereira, he's a double champ in the UFC, and he's one of the basically the most dangerous men on planet. But people don't realize that his backstory is that he was an alcoholic at a tire shop. He was in poverty and all of this other stuff, and he obviously had a habit loop and that repeated process. But his deep underlying reward was to help him forget that he has a lack of purpose. So he drunk like alcohol. I think it was 1 ounce of alcohol every day because it was like a way to help him forget that he has a lack of purpose. Guess what? He started going to kickboxing and going to kickboxing gyms. And then what happened as a result of that is he stopped drinking because kickboxing gave him a sense of purpose. So I feel like that's the most easiest way to grasp what I'm trying to say. He was drinking. He had this bad habit. He was an alcoholic because he had a lack of purpose. But he found something, which was the kickboxing gym, where it gave him a sense of purpose, which basically meant that he didn't have a purpose anymore, meaning he doesn't have to forget anything, meaning he doesn't have to drink anymore. And that stopped his drinking. A lot of people think that these bad habits, they're the ones controlling you. These bad habits happen as a result of something deeper. And once you actually attack that deeper thing, right, you'll always be doing that bad habit, right? That bad habit is either helping you run away or fulfilling something. So basically, replace that bad habit with a good one that fulfills that deep underlying purpose. And whatever it is, it can be whatever you want. So simply all you do to get rid of a bad habit is replace it with a good one. So look, during the dopamine detox, you 100% abstain from this thing that you want to get rid of for 30 days. And during this process, whenever you have free time, think about what is it that you want to do with your life. No distractions. The second thing you want to do is replace this bad habit with a good habit or good habits that fulfill that underlying deep reasoning or reward. Obviously, you slip up sometimes, but you'll see a drastic decrease in the amount of times you do it, and a major increase in your mood and happiness and just genuine mood overall. You will just feel more fulfilled overall. If you watch through this whole thing fully, then you're my ideal customer. And I just want to add that I have free one-on-one coaching calls where I help young guys lost in their journey of self-improvement gain clarity and knowledge on how to actually start progressing in their goals without the uncertainty on whether they will achieve their goals or overcome their roadblocks. So it's free, and if you're interested, you can book a one-on-one call and we could just talk about whatever you feel like is stopping you from making progress and finally accelerate to your goals. So if you're interested, links in the description below. Anyways, that's all I have for you today. I wish you luck on your journey, and peace.